everyone. Welcome to my Facebook Live recorded. This particular night we're going to be working on technique, and the technique that we're going to be focused on is embossing. And I've got a lot of stuff to show you. So to start with, I have our embossing folders. And so we have two different kinds of embossing folders. We have just a plain embossing folder. You can see it's not very thick. And then we also have 3D embossing folders. These 3D embossing folders are much thicker. They're sturdier. I don't know if you can tell the difference just by looking at them. They're sturdier. And the emboss that they do is amazing. And so, I mean, my preference, of course, is the 3D embossing folder. But, you know, you have a place for your regular embossing folder as well. So before we get into some actual embossing, I wanted to just kind of show you a few things that I've been working on. I couldn't show you all these techniques in this video because I want to get to the heat embossing as well. But I will show you that you can emboss on a number of different things. So let's start by talking about the card that I made in the last video. This card is embossed, but basically it's a scored emboss. Hopefully you can see that. I love this card so much, but basically what I did is I embossed all around the edges of it to add some detail to the card. So pretty. I hope you guys can see that embossing. So you can emboss on your card, or perhaps you want to emboss on a window sheet. This window sheet was actually embossed on. It's also called acetate. Stampin' Up! Calls it a window sheet. But basically what I did is I ran the acetate through, or the window sheet through this embossing folder. And what I want you to note is that the embossing on this is very, let me see if I can get a good angle so you guys can see. It's very pretty. It would look pretty on a dark card, or something that we're going to be able to have this highlighted. If you put white behind it, you can kind of see it. It's like when you're holding it, you're able to see the embossing, but you can see that it's not a real deep emboss, but you can emboss on acetate. You can also emboss on vellum. And that's what I did, is I just took a piece of vellum, I ran it through the embossing folder, and what's really fun about the vellum is wherever it's embossed, it turns kind of white, which gives it a little bit of an antique-y, rustic kind of look. I utilized the time-worn type 3D embossing folder with this, and this makes a great background. I just pulled out a piece of cardstock that I can show you, but layering it on a piece of cardstock with some other pieces, it adds a lot of detail, if you will. So you can use vellum, or what about gold foil? Look at this. Isn't this pretty? I actually did Christmas cards with the gold foil, and basically what I did is I used the Merry Melody 3D embossing folder. This particular gold foil is a shiny gold foil. I could have used a brush, but so pretty. It's just crazy how just a simple embossing technique can take your card to the next level. So I wanted to show you that. And then I just wanted to show you just embossing on plain cardstock. This is the Cane Weave 3D embossing folder. This is wild wheat, but isn't that pretty? I love the cane embossing folder, and honestly, I wasn't really fond of the wild wheat initially when I first saw it, but it's one of my favorite colors now, especially in the fall. So I went ahead and embossed it in the wild wheat, but I also embossed it in white, and I was doing another technique, and I'll show you that in just a second. But even the white makes for a really pretty background for your card. And then you can layer, you know, whatever you want on top. I love that. All right. So then what I started doing is there's a number of different things that you can do with your embossing folders. Obviously, you can stick your cardstock in it and run it through. What I started doing is I started adding ink to my embossing folder. And I was using the cane weave, and didn't turn out quite the way I would have liked it to turn out. I really wanted to get the weave itself highlighted, and it just wasn't happening. I used the brayer. Stampin' Up! Has a brayer. We'll do something with it another time. But I used the brayer initially to ink my embossing folder, and it beaded up. You can see the little beads. But I lost, this was the 3D. I totally lost the weave in that. I mean, from afar, maybe it looks okay, but wasn't pleased with this. But I wanted to show you that I was just experimenting. I do have one that I'm going to show you that we're going to do together. It's my favorite. But basically what I'm saying is get your embossing folders out and just experiment and see what happens. So that's what I did with these two pieces. I brought back out the embossing folder. It's not the 3D embossing folder. But what I did is I took my ink, and I'm just looking for an ink pad that I can show you. I'll just show you with the white. I took my ink and I just swiped it over my embossing folder. Had it open and I just swiped. And I ran it through the first time, and this is what we got. Isn't that pretty? It's like, that's all I did. I swiped it and I ran it through, and the raised stayed white and the background was blue. Then what I did is I inked it up again, and this time I spritzed it with some water. I spritzed it with some water, and it basically turned out mostly the same. Hopefully you guys can see the difference in the color though. The color where it was sprayed became more muted, and that's okay. Again, you just got to experiment to see what happens. But I was pleasantly surprised with this, where I was kind of disappointed in this one. I love this particular folder much better if it's just, what it's intended to be, and I don't mess around with it. So let's talk a little bit what we're going to do tonight with respect to embossing. I'm going to pull all of this stuff out of the way, and I'm going to bring in an embossing folder that it's a retired embossing folder. And my apologies for doing that, but I have a reason. One of the things that I want to share with you is you want to just get your embossing folders out and start experimenting with this. This one in particular is a Seabed 3D embossing folder. And so what I did is I pulled out my sponge daubers. So I have a container of sponge daubers, and I label them with the inks that I'm utilizing. And I pulled out 4. I pulled out Garden Green, Crushed Curry, Cajun Craze, and Old Olive. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up this folder, and I'm actually going to put it on top of this black mat so that I can see what I'm doing. But I'm going to start with my Old Olive, or maybe, let me see. Where's my other green? I thought I had all 3 of my greens. Here it is. Found it. I'm going to start with my Old Olive. Actually, I'm not. I'm going to start with my Cajun Craze. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up, and I'm going to pick up my sponge dauber for Cajun Craze, and I'm just going to start. Let me see, which direction does this go? Does it go this direction, or does it go this direction? I'm going to work from this direction, and I'm just going to start daubing. And I'm going to just daub the various elements of this seabed. I'm going to kind of go around, and I'm just daubing. I'm not even trying to be careful. I'm just looking to see if I have any more of these particular and I'm not seeing any, so maybe I'm just going to do that. All right, let's go to the next color. Let's do Crushed Curry. So I'm going to bring my Crushed Curry in. Pick up my dauber. Love the daubers. They just go right on the end of my finger. I use these for this purpose, but I can also use them to ink the edges of a card. Like, for example, we'll just kind of take a little bit of a detour, but you can take it and you can ink the edges of your card and add a little bit of dimension that way as well, a little bit of highlight. So easy. And look what I've done. I've inked the edge of that card. Isn't that pretty? Okay, back to the main event. Now I'm going to go through and I'm just going to daub some of this crushed curry. So let me get some of this in here. Do some right here. All right, now I'm going to pull in the old olive. Tap, tap, tap. This is so fun because I just get to be wild and crazy with it. But you'll be impressed with how this looks once we're done. All right, let me get a little bit more here. And then the last one I'm going to do is garden green. And I have that one right here. So let's put some garden green here. Right through here. I'm just daubing. I love these little daubers to be able to do that. Let's do this. All right, I think I pretty much have what I want right now. And we're gonna stop there. Now what we're gonna do, and I need to stand up, so give me just a second. I'm gonna move things out of the way so that I can stand up because I'm gonna have to go to the cut and emboss here in just a second. But I'm going to remove my mat and I'm gonna get out my little spritzer of water and I'm really going to just high level, I'm gonna raise up high, but I'm gonna spritz, okay? I'm gonna let it set for just a second and then I'm gonna bring my card stock in and I'm gonna lay it down about right here, fold this over, and stand by. I'm gonna take this to the cut and emboss machine and run it through. I promise I won't look until I bring it back to you. Okay, it's been run through. Let's flip it over and look at how this turned out. Isn't that pretty? Oh my goodness. And I don't know, I didn't have enough ink up here, but what I can do is I can cut this card base down. So I'm not really worried about it. Let me show you the other one that I made. I didn't use 3 colors, I just used 2 colors. But the same thing, it's a smaller piece, so I was able to get more of it. But isn't that pretty? What a fun background. And then, you know, if I have a turtle, because we've got a current turtle stamp right now, I could have my turtle swimming through here. Or maybe I've got some fish that I'm going to have swim through here. But the embossing, there's so much you can do with it if you just play around with it. And I loved doing the daubers and inking it up that way. I also enjoyed inking it up. I'll take this and wash it out later. All I have to do is rinse it underwater. But where's my, I'm looking for my little blue embossed pieces that I had here. You know, this isn't that big of a space. Oh, here they are. I'm like, this isn't that big of a space. I shouldn't be losing these. But this also was pretty. And, you know, being able to add whatever stamp I want to, or sentiment, or, you know, maybe there's a flower that I want to punch out just as a flower, die cut out in this was done in boho blue. But could you imagine how pretty just a boho blue flower here would be? And then of course you finish it off. So this is your dry embossing. Let's go ahead and I'm going to just kind of bring back some reminders of what we did with dry embossing. And now we're going to move over to the heat embossing. We're going to have some fun with the heat embossing. All right, so where do I start with the heat embossing? Let's talk about a few things. first about heat embossing, because there's some prepping that you have to do when you're getting ready to do your heat embossing. And you're going to need some additional tools, not just an embossing plate and your cut and emboss. You're going to need a embossing buddy. It helps if you have some silicone tweezers. And then you might also need a brush to brush away any extra embossing powder that you might have. And then of course you're also going to need your heat gun. So let me get settled here. Let me sit down and get settled. And let's talk about embossing on vellum. So we're going to do some embossing on vellum. I've got a card that we're going to make in the end, and so we'll do some other kinds of embossing. But how fun would it be if you could make your own ephemera? So what I did is I took some of our stamps and I stamped and embossed. And we're going to use both the white and the Versamark. You want to use a wet pigment ink to hold the embossing powder, or Versamark, which is a watermark stamp. It will hold the embossing powder. Stamps like this, it's water-based dye ink. You can use it, and we can actually test it out. I've got a piece of scrap that we can test it on, but it doesn't hold the embossing powder quite as well because it's not a real wet ink. I mean, unless you've got a juicy stamp pad, you stamp and you're pretty much done. So, but I thought, how fun would it be to make your own ephemera? And what you're doing is you're actually stamping on vellum. When you stamp on vellum, you just have to be careful because you don't want to burn your vellum, and the vellum can warp. But I didn't have any issues here. I will show you, and we're gonna do some pieces here in just a second. But I do want to show you that I did these in both the white, and I used white embossing powder throughout, but I used white ink, and then I also used Versamark ink. This was the white ink with the white embossing powder. This was the Versamark ink with the white embossing powder. And then this also was the white ink. But what I wanted to show you on this, and this is a good example of what happens when you heat your embossing powder up too much. Now it doesn't matter whether you're doing vellum or you're doing it just on plain cardstock. If you get too much temperature on your piece, it will just actually not only melt your embossing powder, but the embossing powder just kind of sinks in. And you can see there's a couple of areas right here where it's not shiny like the rest of it. Hopefully you can see that matte area there, and it's because the embossing powder has just melted it into the vellum actually. So I can still use that piece, but I wanted to show you what does happen if you hold your heat on your embossing powder too long. You basically want to hold it just long enough to watch it melt, and then after it's melted, you're done. So let me bring in my mat, because I'm going to do some stamping, and I'm looking for, here we go, my Stampin' Pierce mat. And I've got a little strip of vellum because we're going to be stamping these little embellishments that are going to be, actually I'm going to make ephemera with that. I've got a fun punch, and you could use dies as well. I just, for demonstration purposes, I just figured it would be easier if I used the punch, and there's actually some vellum still in there. But you can use dies as well, so you don't have to limit yourself to just a punch. So let's do a couple things. I'm going to use the white, and I'm going to stamp the bigger of the two. Well, they're both basically the same size, but I'll go ahead and I'll stamp with the white. And the nice part about the pigment ink and the Versamark ink is they stay wet for a good period of time. Then I bring in my embossing powder. I got to move things around. And I keep my embossing powder in just a little container. it's easier for me to do it this way. There's a number of different ways that you can do it. You can use the tray that I have here, and all the embossing powder would go into the tray, and then you would just dump the embossing powder back into your container when you're done. Some people use coffee filters. Some people will take typing paper and they'll fold it in half and they'll just pour on the typing paper, and then they can use the typing paper folded to pour it back into their container. This works for me. I can use my little scoop to cover it up, or if I really want to, I can also kind of, just dig in and cover it up. So let's go with this one to start. I'm not going to do more than one at this point in time, but I know it's going to be hard to hear me because this is so loud, but one of the keys to doing this, whether you're on vellum or you're on a cardstock, is to make sure that your gun gets heated up, your heat gun gets heated up. So then when you take it to the paper, you just want to go back and forth. You don't want to stay in one place anytime too long. And I'm just going to continue to do this. I can already see my stem is turning. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but I'm looking to see what I've got. Things are starting to turn. I think I got this little tip right here I need to do. And I take it away right away. I'm watching it melt. I don't know if you saw it was shiny, but I watched it melt. And now we're good to go. So let's go to the next one. I'm going to use Versamark for this next one, just so that you can see the difference. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stamp this one down. And then we'll get them cleaned up. You can see the Versamark on there. You're not going to really be able to see anything. Why am I leaving all these things open? I know better than that. Let's get these closed up so I don't get myself into trouble. I'm going to bring my embossing powder back in now. And I'm going to pour over my Versamark, and you can see that there. Okay, it will get a little bit darker once I melt it. My gun's still warm. My heat gun is still warm. So let's go in and let's melt this one. And then sometimes you can do it from the back as well. I'm just double checking. I see one area that okay. I think we've got it. So we've got both of those, but let's have some more fun. I'm going to bring in a totally different color because it's ephemera. You saw how we did the white. Let me clean these up. This is the white one that I used with the white ink. So let me get my pad here and I'll just clean that up real quick. And I'm going to clean this one up. It's got Versamark on it, so for all practical purposes, I could have just left it because I'm going to use the Versamark again. Only this time I'm going to use gold embossing powder because I thought if we're going to make ephemera and I'm going to add these pieces to a card later, and not today, but I'll use them as I create. Thought, how fun would it be to have some gold ones there as well? So let's go ahead and let's get our Versamark back out. And I'm going to stamp this one here. And I am going to try to get both of them on here just to kind of speed this process up a little bit. So I've got that, and then I'm going to squeeze this one in here, and then we'll punch them out once I get them embossed. But both of these have been stamped. So now what I'll do is I'll take it to my gold embossing powder. And this embossing powder doesn't have a scoop. So I'm just going to kind of tilt my paper or my vellum in here and make sure. Now, you know, one thing that I didn't do, I can't believe it. I wanted to show you, but this is a good example. Can you see that there's powder that's adhering to this? And so I need my brush because anything that you've got the powder on, it will melt. And so you're going to have that as part of your design. Now I'm going to be punching these out, so it's probably not that big of a deal for me, but I was supposed to show you that you need to use your embossing buddy. And I was really good about using it when I was working earlier, and then I didn't. So let's just do one more just to show you what we do. basically the embossing powder has, or the embossing buddy has powder in it. And what that powder does is it takes away any type of oils that you might have had on your hand or your fingers, because that's what the powder is sticking to, are the oils. So the embossing buddy helps to remove that so that when you do add your powder to it, the powder falls right off. And then you don't have to worry about being careful with the brush and making sure you've got everything. So let me do this last one. And you can see the powder just fell right off. I didn't have any issues with it whatsoever. So let's go ahead. I'm going to close this up so I don't make a mess. And I'm going to do the same thing with my white. Actually, I'm going to use my gold some more here in a minute. But I am going to close up the white because we're done with the white. And I don't want to make a mess. So we'll get this closed up. And now what I'm going to do is I'm actually probably, let me see. I think I can stay away from the heat because the heat gets hot. And so I'm going to stay away from the heat. But I want to go ahead and get this melted. And maybe as this gets hot, you can see it turn. It's turning. I don't know if you can see it, but it's turning so pretty. I've got this gold. And once it's done, it's done. You stop any longer and you risk, first of all, you can kind of see there's a little bit of warping to it. I probably did too many at one time, but it'll be fine because we're going to punch it out. But again, if you do too much embossing or too much heat to it, then it'll just melt away. Not melt like melt the embossing powder, but literally melt away. So now what I want to do is I want to get these lined up in here to get them punched out. So I'm going to see how I can get this lined up to get it punched out. And I think I'm good on this one. So we'll punch. So there's that little one. How fun is that? And then we'll put this one in. I have to kind of pay it. Let me see. Which way does this go? I might have to do some trimming as well. Let's see. I think I can get this one. So we'll get this lined up. That looks good. There's another one. Fun, fun. And I've got all these other little pieces that are punching away. And oh no, I wasn't paying attention and I actually had it tilted too much and I punched one of mine gold ones out. So that one's not going to work, but that's okay. Let's see what we can do with these other two that we've got. Let me get this one lined up, and I'm not in to anybody's business over on the other side. So I think I've got this one. All right. Very good. Let me turn this one over if I can get a hold of it. There we go. How pretty is that? Wouldn't that be some fun ephemera? All right. Gosh, I'm having so much fun. I'm so glad I'm doing this because I'm just having fun because I'm kind of creating right along with you guys. I'm going to do some clipping. But if I really wanted to, I could probably sit here and make up a bunch of these and then have them on hand for when I was card making. So let me get this one lined up. Let's see, I had to do some turning on it, I think I got it. There we go. All right. So there we go. We've embossed on vellum. And then I just punched out my leaves. And now I've got some fun ephemera that I can utilize for decorating my cards. Sticking the little leaves behind, maybe a sentiment or another stamp that I'm utilizing. So very fun. You can make your own ephemera. All right. So let's continue to heat emboss. And now I'm going to show you another technique that I think you might enjoy. But don't make fun of me as we get to the rest of the card because you might laugh at me. But I'm not going to tell you about it until we actually get there. So let me move this out of the way. I am doing stamping, but I'm going to actually, you know what? I'm going to make a mess of this. So let me just get these big pieces out of the way. And then, let's see. Now I can move this over. All right, I'm gonna bring my stamp positioner in. And the reason I'm doing that is I need to stamp a sentiment, and I wanna make sure that my sentiment is straight. And what's really nice about, okay, I'm busted. You can see I'm making a Christmas card. I'll explain more in a minute. Let's get the sentiment stamped first. Basically what I want to do is I want to make sure that my sentiment is straight. And I don't know if you can see on this plate or not. Maybe you can with the dark. It's got grid lines on it. And when I'm stamping sentiments, I want my sentiments to be straight. You know, seven or eight times out of 10, I can probably get it straight. But there are the other times that I don't get it so straight. So I use my stamp positioner for two reasons. Number one, so that I can get my sentiment straight. But number two, if in case I don't get a good stamp the first time, I can go back and stamp again. So I'm going to bring my cardstock in, and I just want to double check. I think this is the right one. Yes, I've got several pieces here. I'm going to bring this in, and I'm going to use my grid paper. I'm using a rubber stamp, so I don't need the extra pad under here. But I'm going to use my grid paper to align where my stamp needs to go. And then the other thing on this particular Stamparatus is you've got your magnets. And so even though I'm not a big fan of magnets, I do, since I'm in the middle of my paper, I want to make sure that my card is not moving. So I'm going to pull these magnets off, and they are very, very, very strong magnets. But I'm going to put one, oops, see, can't even keep them apart. I'm going to put one up here, and I'm going to put one down here. And now my card is being held. My stamp is not impaired. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my Versamark, and I'm just going to stamp on my, or ink up my stamp. And then make sure we've got this. Did I put my little eraser away? I had my little tool, my little dry board eraser that I was using last night, but it looks like I've moved it somewhere. So I'm just double checking to make sure that I get good connection, and I'm gonna look to see, and you know, just to be on the safe side, I'm gonna do it again. Since I can't really see, since it's Versamark, I'm just gonna do it again just because I can, and it just is a safe way to do it. So I'm going to go ahead and press this again. Now what I can do is I can pull this out. And you know what I didn't do, and I'm probably going to pay for it, and you guys should not do what how do I want to say this? Do as I say and not as I do. Did you hear that when you were growing up? Did your parents tell you that? Do as I say and not as I do. That's what I'm saying to you right now, because I should have used the embossing buddy. I may have oils on this, so when I go to use my gold ink, it may stick, and then I'm going to have to get my brush out to try to clean it up. So I'm going to use this piece of cardstock here just to kind of help me to move that along. And I do have some issues with it sticking, but the good news is it's not down where the lettering is. So I'm just looking, there's a little bit here. All right, good enough. So let's go ahead and we're gonna get this embossed. And I'm not done with the gold yet. We're coming back to it, but let's go ahead and get this part embossed. So again, heat it up. And then as soon as it starts to change color, you start to move away from it. Hopefully you guys can see as it starts to turn. All right, I think I got most of it. I gotta check my light. Because the one thing about this is if you do miss a spot, this embossing will just rub off. It'll rub right off. I'm gonna see if I can potentially, I'm gonna try an eraser up here to get this off. Yep, that worked. All right, so let's set this one aside. It looks like I got all of it. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you another technique. What I did is I went through my stash and I actually found a card front. It obviously came off of another card, and in fact, I need to probably remove the rest of this sticky stuff off of here. So I'm going to get my undo out, and these were dimensionals, and so I'm just going to remove these dimensionals the best I can, so that I don't have I'm going to push this in the tin. I don't have my card popping up in the center from these dimensionals. Whoops! But you can see they came right off. And this will dry. Basically what I did is I found this card front. I wanted to make a card, but I didn't want to make the card from scratch because I really wanted to focus on embossing. So I found this card front and I'm like, well, okay, we'll use it because I can use the technique that I wanted to use. So this Merry Christmas is going to go on this piece of white cardstock, okay? But let's really, really dress this up because it's going to have a gold inside to it, gold sentiment inside. So let's take our Versamark. Let me see, I'm going to use this side. And I'm just going to take the gold Versamark I'm going to take the Versamark and I'm going to go along the edges of this cardstock. Okay, I'm keeping my fingers in the middle. I'm just doing the edges. Doing my edges. Let's close this up. I'm going to bring my gold back out again. Now I'm going to dip my edges in here. Is it thick enough? I don't know. I might have to do it again. And you can. So let's do this first. I don't think it's enough. And again, no embossing buddy. Although I really didn't care about the embossing buddy this time because most of the card is going over this. But let's go see. We're going to heat this up. And I may come back and do a second coat on this because I don't think it's going to be thick enough. But we'll go ahead and we're going to heat the edges. I'm going to melt this all up. Did I get that side? I don't think I did. All right, I'm going to do it again because even though some of it is done, when I put my card over it, I want the entire edging of that to be gold. So I need to be a lot thicker with my Versamark, which means that I'm going to have to go more of an angle like this. So since I've already embossed it once, now I can do is I can just take it and I can go over it again. And sometimes when you're embossing, heat embossing, while it's still wet, you can actually dip it into the embossing powder again, and you can actually get a thicker heat or a thicker emboss. So I've done that before, especially like if I'm doing sentiments. It's so fun to be able to cut out a sentiment like a word, and then after you've done that, cover it with embossing powder or Versamark and embossing powder, and then heat set it. Now your sentiment is, oh, I think I'm doing a really good job now. Your sentiment will be gold or whatever color you choose to emboss it in, but I'll dip it in 2 and 3 times to make sure that it's thick. I think I'm gonna be good, except for in this one spot. It's like, how come I didn't get enough ink there? I don't know. I think we can get by. And I'm actually gonna take my brush and kind of brush some of this back in. Not that it's going to matter because it's going to be covered by the card. So let's go ahead and put this back on, and we're going to emboss it again. The other thing you could do instead of doing the stamp pad directly is get a dauber and do it. And you might have a little bit more control if you're doing the dauber. But I'm looking, you can see this is embossing. You can see the changed color. The gold is coming out. Just keep moving your gun. In circles, and a little bit more right here that needs to be embossed. Oops. All right, but you can see where we're going with this. I've got this edge embossed. I'm going to put this over again and see if I can get by. But basically what I'm doing is, instead of using gold paper, I'm embossing the edges of my paper, and I'm giving a little bit of a gold border around my card. So pretty. Okay, that's gonna work for me. So let's go ahead and get this adhered, and we'll pull out. There's a little bit of glue there, but it's not raised, so I'm not worried about that. Right. But I love repurposing my cards. For whatever reason, there was an issue with my card. I got heat embossing powder everywhere. But rather than throw it away, I'm not throwing it away. I'll just recreate it. So when I found it in my stash, I'm like, well, this is exactly what I wanted to do. Not necessarily make a Christmas card, but I wanted to do the gold border. How pretty is that? Can you guys see that? As I kind of tilt it, it just kind of took the card up an extra notch, because now I've got gold on it. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in my white card base, and we're going to add the card to my white card base, and that will actually make that gold stand out a little bit more. So let's go ahead and do that. I love embossing. I love playing with the embossing because you just never know what you're going to be able to create. And then once you do create something, you just kind of stare at your card and go, wow, I did that? I really did that? I do this all the time with my cards. I still surprise myself all the time. I'm like, I really did that? All right, so let's go ahead and make sure this gets adhered appropriately. Can you see? Look at that, just that little gold edge around that card. What a difference it made. It just really, really dressed up this Christmas card. One down, and I don't know how many more I've got to go, but I'm one ahead right now with my Christmas cards. Let's go ahead and put our sentiment on the inside. And one of the things that I love to do is I like to stamp my sentiments or emboss my sentiments on a separate piece of cardstock. I don't like to just do it on the inside of the card. Part of the reason for that is that if I make any mistakes, I haven't messed up my card. And plus, I also just like the look of how it looks when you have an extra card base in here. So we'll go ahead and get that. I've got a few little areas that I'm going to try to clean up. There's some adhesive there. Bring out my handy dandy adhesive eraser. And there we go. I've got my first card, my first Christmas card of the season, and embossed the inside and also embossed the edge around it. So there are a lot of fun things you can do with embossing. Heat embossing is so fun. Let me put this off to the side. I'm going to bring in just a couple of other cards that I have made previously with embossing that I wanted to just share with you. So this particular card what we did is we inked the edges and we stamped on the inside, or the outside, with just a leaf. And then I don't know if you can see the embossing or not, but the embossing is actually done in white on top of the plant and off to the edge. It's writing. You can't really read it, but you can definitely tell it's writing. But how fun was that to be able to do it that way? Then I had, for my granddaughter, for her birthday, I made her a mermaid card. And of course, most of the time I make 2 cards, one for me and one for whoever I'm giving it to. So I had made her a shaker card, but you can see the embossing that I did around the edges. Are you able to see that? So I did the embossing around the edges. And then of course I've got my little fish that I stamped, and my ephemera that, where did my ephemera go? I've lost my ephemera. My ephemera that I was utilizing to put in there. And then of course I've got my labels. Happy birthday, you are so mermazing. But she loved it. Little kids love shaker cards. But I feel like because I did the embossing on this as well, that it just really helped to set off the card. And then I also used embossing on this layer. I had some brick designer series paper, and we also had a brick embossing folder. So basically what I did is I embossed a layer and then was able to add my plant to it as well. And this is a fun card because it opens up like this. So this was a fun fold card. But I brought it out because I wanted to show you the embossing that we did. So dry embossing, heat embossing, it's all fun. The cards turn out gorgeous, and there's so much that you can do. I want to bring in some of the pieces that we did, and different ways that you can use your embossing. Let's see. Bring in my Christmas card, and then some of the other pieces that we did embossing. So fun. Thank you for joining me tonight. We'll do more of this. As I was doing this, I'm like, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that. So I may figure out a way to squeeze in an extra class here and there so we can talk about some of the fun things that you can do, with your cards outside of just the to-goes and my face-to-face classes. This was fun for me. So anyway, thank you so much for joining me tonight, and I will see you guys the next time around. I'll be live. So take care, and I'll see you later. Bye, everyone.